Okay, so this component library I found might be one of the best ones out there for NextJS 13. And the reason is it fully supports TypeScript, server and NextJS client components. So that means it really profits off every new technology that NextJS 13 allows us as developers to utilize. These are really beautifully designed components made with Radix UI, which is a UI framework, and also Tailwind CSS. How cool is that? However, the reason I put quotes at the beginning of component library is because it itself does not call itself a component library. It's more like a collection of reusable components where you get the code that is fully typed out for you, and the main benefits are: one, you do not need to install the dependency of a UI framework, but rather only just what these components rely on. And then secondly, the style and the component itself is not coupled together as heavily as it would be in traditional UI frameworks. So this is a really fresh approach to building your own UI components, which I really enjoy, and I think might even be better than the other UI frameworks out there. I've worked a lot with Headless UI and Chakra in the past, and I think this approach makes it easier to get a custom styling, even though it is default also really beautiful. And you'll see exactly what I mean when we take a look at the most interesting components in this UI library, I guess you could call it. It is made by a guy called ShadCN, and now let's dive right into the coolest components I think are in there. And I've got the project open right here on my phone, so we can take a look at the most beautiful components together. And I think it makes sense to start with a button, right? I've used Chakra UI in the past, and I think one of the biggest benefits of using a UI framework are the buttons. You use them a lot in your project, and what Chakra UI specifically and many others also do is that the loading state is fully handled for you. So there's a beautiful spinner, the button is disabled, the cursor also indicates that the button is disabled. And when you do that yourself, that is quite a bit of work that you need to implement that you could just outsource to a UI library like this one. So there's a bunch of buttons. There's a subtle button, a ghost button that doesn't even appear like a button at first. Then there's a link button, which goes really well with next/link. There's a button with an icon. And then most importantly, there is the loading button, right? With the loading spinner, the button is disabled. Now, what I've noticed is that the cursor does not indicate the button is disabled yet, but that will be a very minor fix that you could make easily with Tailwind CSS. Okay, so next up in the coolest components, let's look into the inputs and the text area, because arguably those are, along with the buttons, the most important ones by far, if you want to build forms and actually have a good time doing that in React. So let's start with the input. There's just the, default input. There's a disabled one if the user has already submitted the form, for example, and it is currently submitting, then you might want to disable your inputs. There's a label, there's with text. Those are just some very minor utilities that would be no problem at all to implement yourself, but it is handy that this, library, again in quotes, does this for you. There's one with a button, and that is pretty much it. You've got all the default ones following best practices, such as being tabbable, actually having a ring around them, so you notice when you're focused on them. And then there's the text area to go with that. And the text area looks very similar in style, but it does look really good and it fulfills its purpose perfectly. All right, with those basics out of the way, let's get into some really interesting components. And first one I want to mention is the tooltip. It looks really good, it's really easy to implement, and essentially, if you don't know what a tooltip is, if you hover over an element for 1 or 2 seconds, then a message appears explaining to the user what this action is about to do, that the user is about to perform, or the meaning of whatever the user is hovering over. It looks really clean. I think that is one of my favorite components. Next up, and I think one of the best components in this in quotes library, is the command, right? It looks really cool, and what it allows you to do, essentially you can input a bunch of objects into an array that the commands will then be filtered by. So as you write into the commands, everything available will be filtered out for you. It looks great, and the commands can be used for something like quick actions. And also there's something really cool in here which I want to point out, which is the combo box. And essentially handling all the logic for you is a box that, as you type in, selects everything that is still available to you. In this case, it's kind of like frameworks like NextJS, SvelteKit, Nuxt.js, and as you type in, those results get filtered. Really convenient, and you can just copy and paste the code over into your project and then specifically address everything that you want in there. And the style and the functionality is just not coupled together, which I think is a great benefit in this UI library. Now, I don't want to go over every component. That would totally, be too much for this video, but I want to point out one more, which I think is really cool, and that is the select. Now, if you've ever worked with a selector in the past, chances are you've used an NPM package for that called React Select. Now that is really convenient, and it allows for a bunch of use cases like multiple select and whatever. It's actually great. The benefit of this select is that it's in the same style, although you could totally do that in React Select as well. And it's just really convenient to use. And one specialty I noticed about it is, take a look at this. When you select an element, so whatever you select, this is kind of difficult to explain. Whenever you select an item, right, take a look at where the modal or the options pop up then. So let's select the banana, and then when we reopen this whole selector, you can see it opens in the same spot as banana where it is already selected. I hope you got what I meant by the visual. It's kind of hard to explain, but essentially the text that pops up when you open the select matches the current selection. So the height of whatever is opened, where all the options are inside of, is adjusted to whatever is currently selected. And I think that's a really cool attention to detail that you might not even notice at first. And that's pretty much it. I'm gonna link everything in the description. Make sure to start the repo if you think this is as cool as I think it is, because it makes pretty design really accessible to all developers. The fact that the creator of this just made it so, because he needed a bunch of components that looked identically across projects, made it open source for everyone to use without attribution, etc., is a really cool thing, and I think that deserves a lot of respect. The coolest thing about it, you can do whatever you want with the code, right? It is code that you copy and paste over into your own file, so you have full control over how it's styled, how it's written, and that is a massive benefit compared to something like Chakra. So check it out if you want in the description. I think it's one of the best possibilities to build your UI for NextJS 13 in the app directory. Now, whether you should use that in production as of now is a different question, but you can. So that's all I want to share. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, and bye bye.